You're listening to 102.7 Chop FM, and this is ArtsTalk. Good evening. This is 102.7 Chop FM, and you're listening to ArtsTalk. I'm Dave Peters.
I'm Taylor Koss.
And this show is dedicated to bringing the arts to Newmarket. Not just musical arts, although there's always lots of musicians on our show, but any artist practicing any discipline, be they amateur or professional. And if you're in the arts and would like to appear on this show, then we would like to hear from you.
You can get in touch with us by emailing artstalkradio102.7@gmail.com, or you can check us out on Facebook. That's facebook.com/artstalkradio, and you can send a message there as well.
And don't forget to tune in every Wednesday at 6 o'clock sharp-ish.
6:01 and a half.
Not too bad, 6:01.5, to hear good music and to find out what's going on in the independent arts scene. Our guest tonight is Colin James Gibson.
Woo!
All the way up from Toronto. Thank you very much for coming up, Colin.
No problem. This is kind of like a tour for me.
Your radio tour.
Yeah, exactly.
I had to leave yesterday. Had to pack a bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Up to the Great White North.
Say goodbye to your
Newmarket.
family. I'll see you later. You guys first met, correct me if I'm wrong, on the Velvet Underground project.
Yes, we
Correct.
did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was a very interesting opportunity. I went to see the show. It was
Yes, you
awesome.
did.
You guys did a great job.
It's
Thank
so
you.
cool.
And I know Taylor had a great time at it. What was your experience like, Colin?
So that was part of a whole series of tributes to 1967. My friend Rob and I, we've done a couple of different tributes over the years.
We've had Rob on the show too, Rob from Paint.
We did,
Yeah,
So-
Rob
Paint?
Johannes from
Yeah.
Paint. He had brought me in for a bunch of Neil Young tributes that we did because he knew I was a big Neil Young fan. And then he suggested doing Radiohead, and I said, there's 3 guitar players in that band. So he brought me on for that. And then we did that pretty successfully, and I was drunk in a cab on my way home one night, and he messaged me saying, look at all these records that came out in 1967. We should do one of them. And in my semi-inebriated state, I said, why don't we do them all? Didn't quite know what I was in for at the time, but we selected. So we did Velvet Underground, we did the Doors, we did the Beatles, and we did Jimi Hendrix.
And it was a rotating cast of musicians
Correct.
for each of those.
Yeah. So
With you and Rob being the only constant?
Correct. So when we came to the Velvet Underground stuff, we had some very specific requirements that we needed to fill, and one of them was like we need a Nico. We need someone who can play keys and do the Nico parts, and Rob instantly said, I know the perfect person. So,
Nice.
So
How had you met Rob prior to that?
I met Rob from Hysteric's first show ever. We played the Hard Luck Bar, and his other band, he plays bass in a punk band too. Oh my God, Rob. Love it. Yeah, Rulers of the Moon. And they were headlining that show, and Rob was so nice. Like, he was just like, he probably could tell that we were super new and didn't know what we were doing, and kind of like, you can spot a new band when they're setting up. Anyway, he just befriended us and was so nice, and yeah, we just started talking, and then we just kept in touch, because you do.
And then you wound up being Nico.
Well, we always talked about wanting to play together. Like, Paint and Rubella did a couple shows together, and yeah, we just always wanted to collaborate, and we knew that we liked a lot of the same music. So when you guys came up with that, I was like, just, my heart swelled when I got that message. It was awesome.
So we were talking before the show about the range of musical styles that you play, and I'd like to talk about that.
Sure.
Talk about that, but I understand a little bit better now how you could take on a project that size. That's a lot of stuff to learn.
Man, yeah.
Stylistically different from each one.
Also,
Absolutely.
it wasn't just the albums, because you learned another set of music to do an opening set. Like, there's,
Yeah.
I don't know how you did it.
Yeah, so once we booked the shows at this great venue, Say What, in Toronto, they had said, okay, great, you guys can do this, but we don't want to book a second band to open you. So can you do a opening set of music that kind of is in the style or that is from the era? So it was like, okay, now on top of learning 4 complete albums, start to finish, that are among the most revered records ever made, we have to come up with a kind of B-side set of a bunch of other random stuff. So
No problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it was literally like, I threw out I was the musical director for all these shows. So after we had arranged the sort of main set, I was like, okay, literally, guys, just throw out every song you know, and let's see if any of them will work in this context. And luckily, a lot of them did. So we kind of ended up doing, on Beatles night, we did a bunch of other British bands. On VU night, we did a bunch of other kind of female-fronted bands and things like that. So we were able to kind of tie it in stylistically. But that's been the norm for me for kind of my whole career, is just like learning. I was saying to you earlier, it's sort of like learning on the job. Like somebody comes to me and says, hey, do you know this jazz song? And it's like, well, no, but now I'm going to have to figure it out, right? So
we talk about this a lot on this show, though, is making a living as a musician and what a challenge it can be. And I think we should talk about that on the air here. Is your approach to this, which is as a professional and somebody who views it as a craft, a trade that can be developed, and it isn't really about you just only ever playing this kind of style that you love. It's about being adaptable to what is required.
Yeah, exactly. And I said to you earlier, it's sort of like I always liken myself to a short order cook. I think that's probably the best analogy. I did my own original music, put my focus on that for a long time, and I found after a while it was becoming really unsatisfying and really kind of limiting. So what I ended up doing was sort of just opening it up a lot more, and in that process you start to learn the craft of being a musician and the traditions that underscore that and underpin that. And that's existed for as long as human history has existed. But I think the important thing for us is to realize is that that music serves a function. It serves a societal function. It serves a social function, an entertainment function. And once you kind of acknowledge that, it's really easy to sort of put your ego aside and say, I will play whatever people want me to play. Obviously, I have my own taste, and I have things that I gravitate towards. But I think one of the things that's kind of hurt me personally in my original music is I kind of have, I would say it's like color blindness. I have genre blindness. Like, to me, it's all just one big river of music, and I don't understand necessarily why you have to separate one thing from another thing. Because let's face it, the idea of genre is a 20th century idea, right? It's something that was invented by marketers.
Exactly.
The entire history of music as a cultural thing, though, is about exchange. It's about cross-pollination. It's about hybridization. And those aren't things you hear about when you're trying to market a particular sound or a scene. You know what I mean?
It still, though, speaks to something of, I don't know whether you'd call it courage or just open-mindedness. But somebody said, okay, we're going to play a reggae set. Well, what if you've never done that? Or we're going to play jazz. Some area where you just hadn't really developed those skills. You just jump right in and do that.
Exactly. But I think the thing that prevents people from doing that a lot of times is just fear, right? Like, obviously, there's musical literacy. There's a certain level of competence you have to have with an instrument or with theory or, whatever your kind of entry point is. But beyond that, it's like, well, once you learn music theory or once you learn how to play an instrument, there's no reason why you can't take that and apply it to a different style, right? And some of the best, musicians throughout history, people that I really admire, have been people who have that same kind of deficiency in their brain about not being able to really identify genres per se, right? And I think that's hurt me in a marketing standpoint, and that I can't always really explain what it is that I do in the most succinct way. But I think the work speaks for itself. So for me, it's like, just let me get in a room and play and show you kind of all the different things that I'm into, and then it'll all kind of make sense, right? It might not make sense on paper to be like, I like Jimi Hendrix, but I also like, Appalachian folk music, or, a piece of church music from the 1600s or whatever. You have to combine those.
Gospel. We were talking about, you whip out a couple gospel songs if you have to.
Exactly, yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so and that was the other thing, is I spent a lot of time as a busker, and I think that was a really great training ground for me personally to develop that adaptability. When I first started busking, I was going out and playing, the stuff that I liked, and I found that when I started switching to trying to read what people were asking of me or what they were responding to, it generated an instant response, right? And with busking, you have a measurable way of noticing that, which is how much money is in your case at the end of your day, right? So I think that's something that for a lot of musicians, I would really strongly encourage, just because it might be difficult, it might be weird, you might be really bad at it, but you're going to learn a lot in a very short amount of time, and it's a great apprenticeship for anyone who wants to try to do music in different styles and sort of work in different genres.
This is ArtsTalk on 102.7 Chop FM. I'm Dave Peters.
I'm Taylor Cross.
And we are in conversation with Colin James Gibson, singer, songwriter, written some songs.
Yeah, I've written a lot of songs. That was kind of an early thing, starting off. And that's another thing where, like, when you start writing songs, you don't necessarily appreciate the craft of songwriting. So from tackling all of this different stuff, especially with the 67 series that we did over the summer, we did the Beatles, right? And everyone loves the Beatles, right? But I'd never really sat and dissected a song like Penny Lane before, or She's Leaving Home, or, any of these kind of very Baroque, ornate pieces that they had done. And I was kind of a John Lennon guy, so I had that sort of stereotypical, like, Paul's the softie, right? He's the sort of schmaltzy guy.
Paul's the romantic.
Paul's the romantic. But when you actually learn to play Penny Lane, you realize, like, this is a hell of a song. Like, this is really immaculately composed, and there's a lot of really interesting, strange musical ideas happening here. I always feel the same about jazz, too. Like, people think that jazz is this kind of disposable background music, kind of unobtrusive thing, but there's the weirdest musical ideas you will ever find are happening in that sphere, right? So it's like, even though it seems like a kind of passive genre, there's a lot of very strange active exploration going on there.
That's interesting. So, because you're right, the Beatles especially are thought of as not throwaways. Everybody loves the Beatles, as you say, they're one of the most famous bands ever. But the music is pop, right? It's thought of as being light.
It's easy to dismiss them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a light pop song. And Penny Lane, everybody, you say the words, they run the song through their head.
I don't know what it's...
Penny Lane.
Okay,
Where did you find the complexity in that song? What did you learn about that you hadn't found on a surface listening?
Well, just on a technical level, it changes keys between the verse and the chorus, which is really weird. And McCartney as a writer is incredible for a lot of reasons, but the main thing is, like, you're talking about a guy who didn't learn to read music or score music until very late in life, like until the 2000s, I think, when he started writing symphonies and things like that. So what you're hearing is a guy who is able to create all of these different textures and chord changes purely by ear, which is an amazing skill. Another one of my favorite guitar players is Django Reinhardt, famous French jazz guitar player. And Django, first of all, he only had 2 fingers on the one hand, so he's doing all that stuff with just the 2 fingers. But he wasn't just musically illiterate; he was, like, actually illiterate. Couldn't read, didn't learn until later in life, and never learned to read music, right? So if you go on guitar player forums, you hear a lot of stuff about guys like him or guys like Hendrix, and people go, yeah, he was great, but he could never read a score. And it's like, but who cares? He could play anything on that score, right? Just from the experience of having a good ear and playing a lot of different stuff, right? So that's the kind of thing I aspire to. Like, I do have an understanding of theory, and I do read, and I've studied that kind of stuff. But what I found is that the best players are people who just really have great ears and know how to respond to what's happening around them, as opposed to people who are sort of taking a stylistic or a theoretical dogma and kind of implementing that and sticking to it very strictly. The best people are always the ones who are, like, willing to be mongrels and switch things up and change things up a little bit. So that's kind of where I come from now.
I can't imagine you doing what you do as a professional role, where you're sometimes asked to learn a piece or more than one piece in a very short period of time without being able to read a chart. I mean, could you do that by ear? You
probably could, and especially if you were someone who would really spend a lot of time practicing, I think it would be possible. I've done a lot of, especially recently, I've done a lot of studio work. I've done a lot of what they call jobber gigs, of freelance guitar player stuff. And often for those, you literally don't have time to sit and practice the song. Like, you might have time to listen to it one time through, and then someone hands you a chart, and you might not, if you're not able to use your ears to help you get out of jams when you run into a chord change that's not quite right, or especially with guitars, like guitar players talk a lot about voicings, which is like, where are you playing that chord on the neck of the guitar, right? There's always, like, more than one way to do it, right? So that kind of thing, it can be just a matter of the individual player and their taste. But if you have really good ears, you're going to be able to find those little things and sort it out and get you out of those jams. So I think that's the most important thing. It's funny because like you talk about charts, like so I said to you earlier, I've played in churches and I've played in metal bands and everything in between. So I did this church gig last summer. They hired me for a church service, right? It's a United Church community service. And their piano player had just quit, and she was like, it's kind of a hippie church. Maybe we're thinking a guitar player might be a good substitute for a pianist. So I said, sure, fine, send me the charts, I'll learn them. And a lot of church music is very simple. Like they got bass line on the one hand on the piano and just the vocal melody on the other hand. There isn't really a lot of harmony in the traditional sense of like chords happening. It's very basic stuff. So she sent me these charts, and I went through all but one of them. And I sort of got the gist of it. And I was like, this stuff's going to be pretty easy, like it's 3-chord and whatever. It's, the gig's 2 days from now. I don't really have that much time to go through it. So I show up, go through the service, everything's going great. And then I flip to the last chart in the stack that they gave me, which is the Lord's Prayer. And the Lord's Prayer, this particular arrangement of it, it was clearly like the piano player that they had before had gotten bored with the arrangement that they were doing. So he pulled out a crazy, like Chopin, like very pianistic, very elaborate version of the Lord's Prayer. And as often happens with piano scores, the chord chart was wrong. So like on a piano score, you'll have like the actual sheet music. And then for dummy guitar players like me, they write the chord names on top of each bar.
That's what I read when I read sheet music on a piano, though.
Exactly. So and like
just read the guitar.
If you're going to buy a songbook for any artist, that's what's going to happen, right? You'll have the vocal melody, and then it'll just say G, and you're like, okay, so I get it. Right? This Lord's Prayer was a beast, though. It was like 6 minutes of non-repeating, like all different chord changes, completely through composed, and half of them were wrong because the piano players don't usually care what the guitar players are doing that much, right? They're like, figure it out on your own. So I start playing this, and about 10 seconds into it, I realize that what I'm doing is completely wrong, is not following the congregation, what they're singing at all. Flop sweat, I'm nervous, I'm freaking out, I'm going, oh my God. Of course, this is the one piece I didn't review, right? It went fine, they paid me for the gig. I wasn't necessarily super eager to go back to that particular church, but that was a big lesson for me in like, just review all the charts. Always go and look at everything they're giving you. Even if you're not going to play it, look at it first so that you know, hey, this thing says it's in G and they're playing it in A sharp or something, right? And that's happened a couple of times, and to me, it's like that's where the theory background comes in handy, right? It's like you have to know that you're like, okay, it's not going to be perfect, and I'm going to botch a few things up, but I'll get to the right place at the end of the thing.
Mm-hmm. Musicians in that church audience might have noticed what had happened. In the main, they probably didn't.
No,
it's different though in a studio where the meter's running and you're a hired gun coming into play. Where that requires a little more precision, probably a little more focus.
I would hope that someone looks at the charts if they're going into the
a good
studio.
chart, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
If someone hired you.
Yeah, let's hope. I mean, sometimes it's weird though because the studio environment has really changed a lot. So there used to be these big kind of organized sessions where you'd have all like top of the line monster players, where the bass player is a teacher and all that kind of stuff. Because the studio thing has kind of bottomed out economically now. A lot of it,
the at-home do-it-yourselfer technology.
Correct. Yeah. And not only that, but also like engineers don't actually have to know much about music theory at this point. They learn how to manipulate the technology, but they don't have to learn about songwriting or chords or any of that kind of stuff.
Arrangement.
So sometimes I'm sitting in a studio when I do studio work, and the guy on the other side of the glass is essentially a technician, and they don't always give you a ton of direction. So sometimes someone will send me. I'm going to record this song and it'll be these 4 chords, and I'm like, great, I don't know the rhythm, I don't know the feel of the song, I don't know what else is happening arrangement wise, I'm not sure what the vocal's going to be exactly, and you just go in and sit and play to a click track and you're like, I don't know, like I'm playing the chords. I don't know if this is going to work for you or not, right? And I had one funny experience where the engineer was trying to auto-tune something, and he was like, what key is this in? Like, I couldn't imagine an engineer from 50 years ago asking me what key a song was in.
No, he'd be telling you.
Exactly. He'd be like, you're doing the wrong chord there, right?
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So I think that's kind of changed in that a lot of the people who are willing to go into studios and work on that kind of music are people who are paying for it out of their own pocket, and they're doing demos, and they're doing covers. They're doing a lot of young people want to do mashups now. So you're taking two other songs and kind of resetting them in a totally different musical kind of scenario. So that has been really challenging, but it's a lot of fun too, because the feedback I get from like something like, and I'll be playing that for 4 minutes kind of thing, right? And they go, wow, yeah, you're really solid and really tasteful. And I'm sitting there going, it's because I have nothing else to work with. And like, I'm just trying not to screw this up. And I'm playing to a click track, so I don't know what anyone else is going to be doing on this.
Right.
I'm just trying to play it in time. You know what I mean? Like, that's the bare minimum you have to do. And as long as you do that, you get asked back, and you can sort of, you can keep your job. But for me, it's like, a lot of the time it's cutting it down, making it simpler, making it more, easy to do for people. And they go, oh, you're so tasteful. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just trying not to mess up. You know what I mean?
Interesting. One of the coaches that I had said that he's a professional drummer. The less he plays, the more work he gets.
Yeah.
Minimalist. Be very minimalist.
Yeah, especially when you're working with singers, right? Because everything's got to support the vocal. So as musicians, we get really hung up on what we're doing individually, whether or not it's challenging. Is it too straightforward? Is it too stock? Like, does it feel cliche? But when you're working for a singer, it's like the singer is the one making that call, and the vocal is the thing that's important. So everything you do has to support that. I told Taylor this when we did the Velvet Underground thing. As an accompanist or a sideman, your job is essentially to be the Secret Service, right? Like, your job is to be there to support, protect, uphold that person in whatever way possible, take a bullet for them if necessary. But that's your job. And if you're trying to put your own ego into it, if you're trying to show off, if you're trying to do something that you think is more interesting, you're not really doing your job as an accompanist, right? So that's the feedback I get from people anyway.
Yeah, I think you did a good job at that. I think Spacker Dave, though, was a little more front and center.
Oh, yeah, no, he killed it. He's amazing. So we could have done Sweet Jane all night long, and everyone would have been pretty entertained, I'd say. It was good.
Yeah, and he's one of those musicians that has a way of like putting himself in the forefront in the best possible way. He's an awesome guy, and a great player.
This is ArtsTalk on 102.7 Chop FM. I'm Dave Peters.
I'm Taylor Koss.
And we are in conversation with Colin James Gibson. This looks like about time to play a song.
Yeah.
What do you think? So what are we going to hear?
Well, for about the last, I've had a rock trio called the Stormalongs for the last decade. We're currently celebrating our 10th anniversary, although we're now in our 11th year, because it's taken us almost a year to get this new record out. So as of tomorrow on our Bandcamp, thestormalongs.bandcamp.com, we're putting out our Embrace the Hiss record, which is originally was a series of EPs. It was 5 EPs that we recorded on cassettes on a 4-track recorder in our rehearsal space. We've got, I want to say, 6 full-length albums now. The first 5 were done in a really fantastic studio on Toronto Island called The Gas Station with Mr. Dale Morningstar, who is sort of my guru as a musician. But for the last one, we were talking about economics earlier, and we spent a lot of money on making these records over the years. And the economics of it were such that we just sort of decided, hey, let's try to make something really cost effectively. Kind of looking back at musicians that were working in the 60s and earlier eras that didn't have a lot of technological options. So we did this series of EPs on our 4-track recorder in our jam space. It's called Embrace the Hiss. We had a good response to it, so we've now had it professionally mastered, and we're going to release it as a sort of double album. And that's coming out tomorrow, actually.
Yay.
That's awesome.
So cool.
So people can find that on Bandcamp?
Find it on Bandcamp, and there's a whole whack of different stuff on there for this one because we weren't paying for any studio time. We said, let's just throw it all at the wall. It's kind of our white album in the sense of, like, everything in the kitchen sink went into it. And we took a lot of time to sort of tinker around and try to find the best takes and how to figure out the best drum sound that you can possibly get with one microphone and things like that.
Wow, I didn't even think about the drums, yeah.
Think about that, right?
That's
How many
crazy.
did Adam put on?
There was
Clint's
23 or something like that.
23 mics on the drums
That
at
was
one
nuts.
point. And
Yeah.
you're trying to capture all that with one mic.
27.
Exactly, yeah, that's the norm, right?
And it sounds awesome. Like I'm a big fan of. I have at least a few of the Embrace the Hiss sides or
Yeah,
collections,
the
or because it was like
EPs,
broken down into like 5 different releases or something.
Yeah, it was 5 EPs.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, thank you. And
Yeah,
we
great.
actually spent the biggest amount of time just working on. We were a big fan of Daptone Records. Those guys, Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, and that whole kind of Brooklyn
Yeah.
soul thing. And those guys record on tape, and they use very minimal miking and all that kind of stuff. So we were kind of inspired by that, and we thought, okay, if that'll work for a soul band, what will it sound like if it's a really loud alt rock band, right? So that's sort of where that idea came from. But this is a song on that record. I actually wrote this song when I was 14.
Aw, sweet.
So
Very cool.
occasionally I like going back and collaborating with my younger self. So this is a song I wrote when I was quite young. Young one, the city's done. Let's run away for too long. I've been wrong. I'll never stay. We could tread the skies. We could sing divine. Our love alive. We could claim these wasted lives. Temples and secret stones are bound to me, 'cause I'm aware that I'm not there to join the wing. We could tread the skies. We could sing divine. With our love alive, we could claim these wasted lives. Tied in the falls are the signs of the last lie. And I can recall our hearts were so pacified. We could tread the skies. We could sing divine. With our love alive, we could claim these wasted lives. We could claim these wasted lives.
Beautiful.
Colin James Gibson on 102.7 Chop FM. You're listening to Arts Talk. I'm Dave Peters.
I'm Taylor Cost.
And we are in conversation with the man who just sang that song, Colin James Gibson. So 14 years
Wow,
old.
yeah, that's
it's a pretty
crazy.
sophisticated tune for 14.
Yeah, well, I started playing really young. I had some family members that were like old-timey country music.
Cool.
So I learned a few chords at a very young age, and then, like a lot of little kids, there were a lot of other things in my life, baseball and mostly just baseball, to be honest. And then around the time I was I think 11 or 12, I started to really get into the Beatles, and some of my friends were starting to play guitar, and I realized, like, oh, wait, I kind of already know a little bit about this. My mom had an old beat-up classical guitar from when she was a kid that she had taken a few lessons on and then swiftly abandoned, and had a broken G string tuning peg on it, so you couldn't tune the G string. But what I used to do was, and I know now what I was doing was making up open tunings, but I would just sit and tune all of the strings until something sounded cool, and then start messing around with that. And I did that for a couple of years before I had the nerve to finally say to my mom, like, I want some lessons. I want to actually go to a guitar teacher. And there were only a couple of guitar teachers in my town. There was one French guy and one English guy. So I went to the English guy, and he was kind of this Satriani, Steve Vai, like really shredder guitar player, monster guy, right? And he still is. He in fact, is still doing great work. But I took lessons with him for about 6 months, and then after one of my lessons, my mom was like, go out to the car, and then she came out a few minutes later, and she's like, Jason says he doesn't want to teach you anymore. And I was devastated. Like, I was like, what did I do wrong? Like, I haven't been learning.
You're fired by your teacher?
Yeah, my teacher fired me. And then she told me later, though, and he actually told me later, it's because I realized at that point you were learning too fast, and every time you came in for a lesson, you had already learned past the thing I was going to teach you this week. So he's like,
he was intimidated.
He just cut me loose. He was like, you're going to figure it out on your own. You know what I mean? And so at the time, it was really painful, but in the end, it's like, that's a real, like, Zen master kind of teacher move of, like, I've given you the basics, now go and figure it out. So when I started really playing guitar in earnest, the songwriting thing happened almost right away, just because I was like, it was a good way to practice, it was a good way to learn new things, find your voice, all that kind of stuff. I never wanted to be a songwriter, I never wanted to be a singer, I wanted to be a guitar player, but it just came out of that. And I wrote a lot of songs when I was in high school, so still to this day, I mean, I write still now, but often when I'm really in need of inspiration, I'll go back at my notebooks from when I was in high school and pull things out and go, oh, that looks like maybe that's something, and maybe that's something. And so that song I just played, Young One, that was one that I pulled out. It used to be a waltz, and it had this kind of totally different feel to it. But the chords were good and the melody was good, so I just kind of said, I'm gonna collaborate with younger Colin and tell him what he did wrong, and then fix it and use it now.
I love it.
So you always have a stockpile of stuff to go back to. So.
I always wonder, because I do that too, and I'm always wondering, like, am I looking in the wrong place? Like, should I be going I mean, you should always go forward, but I do like to go back and see if there's some, like, hidden treasure that I kind of forgot about and whatever. And,
totally.
But wondering if it was, like, a good thing to do, or, like, if, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah.
Am I going around in circles, or should I be focusing on going forward?
Yeah.
Anyways, it's cool to know other people do that.
Yeah, and what I found is, for myself as a musician, is I found is it's cyclical. Like, you do sometimes. One of my favorite books is this book Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake. It's this kind of strange fantasy novel, and at one point one of the characters says to one of the others, sometimes you have to tread a circle. And it always stuck with me, because it was like, sometimes in order, especially with musicianship, where you always feel like you plateau at some point, and you're like, I'm not getting any better, I'm not learning anything, I'm not coming up with any better song ideas. Sometimes you can get there by going back to where you started and just sort of revisiting that, right? So I'm a big believer in that. I don't think anyone should discount anything that they did when they were young just because they were young. Sometimes, youth speaks with a lot of truth, and sometimes it can feel cringy or cliched, like that part where I'm saying, we could sing divine. Like, that to me was like, I avoided that line for years because I was like, it's so romancy.
Can I sing that?
Yeah, can I actually sing that? Yeah. But then now that's what I realized, when we were making Embrace the Hiss, and we were all throwing songs into the mix to make that record, I was like, this record needs some of that. It needs a little bit of that idealistic romanticism, you know what I mean? And sometimes the only way to get that is from someone who hasn't been trampled by life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whose soul hasn't been crushed.
Exactly. Or you can just go back and say, remember what I was like when I wasn't crushed, right? And maybe there's other people out there who are in that same situation right now. So I try not to judge it too much, and in the songwriting stuff, I can be really self-critical, and
it's hard, yeah. And then you get other people's opinions. Like, another thing I find with going back to songs from the past is, like, back then I didn't have all these criticisms that people gave me or something. Like, you know, you try to have thick skin and you try to be like taking it with a grain of salt. But yeah, it's weird how putting your songs out there, you're giving it to people and you're going to get something back whether or not you like it.
Yeah.
And it can kind of hurt you sometimes, or it can be, you know, it's a learning experience.
Yeah, because you were being very open-hearted at that time as a youth, right?
Yeah, before I showed any of my songs to anyone, I was like, this is the best song I've ever got. This is fantastic, or whatever, because I just was so proud of it, and it was like something I created. And then the first time someone's like, yeah, I didn't want to cry today, and like if it's too depressing or something, right? It's like, oh, okay. And then you just start to develop these like, oh, well, people didn't like this, and people didn't like that, and just trying to...
Was it words first for you or music? Because you learned on the bass, right?
When I was a kid,
yeah.
I used to write poetry, which was probably horrible, and I would play bass, like metal bass, my 5-string. So metal bass and poetry, that's how I started.
What a mix. When the lyrics came next, and that's... It's interesting, because you can't always presume that you're going to be able to write lyrics, no matter how good of a guitar player you are.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because I've kind of... So I was talking about all the records we've done with the Stormalongs. I've kind of hit a point now where I've run out of things to say. Like I've started. I think the next thing I do solo is going to be a solo guitar record. Actually, I have a couple of type songs with words and things that I wrote for a concept project that I kind of abandoned, and I might take the best bits of that and make like a singer-songwriter record. But I've been really inspired lately by people like Bill Frisell, who's a really amazing jazz guitarist. Jazz in quotes. I mean, he does everything. He's sort of like what I aspire to be.
Right.
But it's really opened my eyes to the non-representational power of music when you ditch lyrics. Like lyrics add a lot of specificity to music, right? And music is a language. It's true. It is linguistic, but it's not axiomatic. So if I say to you, you know, there's the mixing board. The range of possibilities of what I mean by mixing board are somehow defined. Music is not like that, right? Like a G minor might sound sad to one person. It might sound romantic or mysterious to someone else, right? And I'm kind of getting more into that. Like I like the idea of creating something on a purely kind of musical sense and then seeing what people interpret out of it rather than sort of dictating to them what that feeling is.
So are you talking about crafting the song with some objective in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I was talking earlier too about the sort of function of music, right? Like I think if what you're trying to do is provide an emotional release for people, there's more than one way to do that, right? So it doesn't always have to be with an impassioned vocal or really, you know, incisive in your face lyric or something that, you know, you can sometimes get at it in a more roundabout way. So for me lately I've been composing more on the kind of instrumental side of just looking at it in a purely musical sense of like, I mean, look, the world's screwed up right now. There's a lot of really crazy things happening, and I don't feel like necessarily another take or another opinion on things is necessarily the most valuable thing. What is valuable to me, though, is the function of music as a release mechanism for human consciousness, right? So something that allows you to empathize, to connect with someone else, to let go of a feeling that is becoming toxic, whatever those things are. And you don't necessarily need words to do all of that stuff. So in the past, when I was writing, it was always... I'd come up with kind of a musical idea and then lyrics, and then if the lyric didn't happen, the song idea kind of died on the vine, right? Now I'm more in a place of like, well, if you've got a good musical idea and the lyric's not happening, then maybe this piece just doesn't want to have lyrics, right? Like maybe there's another way to go about that. And I do think I'm going to go back at some point to writing. Like I've never had writer's block. Like I always say, it's like groundwater. You drill down far enough and you're going to find it. Like if you're a songwriter, you're a songwriter for life. It's just always there. I think what's changed for me is I don't necessarily know what to say right now, just with the world being the way it is. So I'm looking at how can I use music to connect with people in a different way that isn't lyrical, that isn't based on that approach. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah.
So you could well go into a long instrumental phase here just because.
Possibly, yeah. And I think it's just it's part of my evolution as a guitar player. I think too is just, you know, reaching that point where your vocabulary is now strong enough on the instrument that you can start to express other things. Right. I was 14, minor and C, like I already knew those chords, right? And the lyric was, you know, easy to write once you've sort of got a rhythm in mind. So. I'm trying to strip away all of that stuff, get rid of the crutches, get rid of the things that make me revisit those old patterns, right?
Does Stormalongs tour much? Do you do much gigging?
So we're going to do a couple of shows next month. We're going to do some stuff to support the album. We have toured over the years, and we've done a lot of shows over the years. When we started off in Toronto in 2007, wow. It was a really dodgy time in the Toronto indie rock scene. There were a lot of very shisty promoters and a lot of really heavy competition and backbiting and just scenes.
It wasn't a cooperative, collaborative.
It wasn't a
music
collaborative scene because there were a lot of promoters who were pitting everyone against each other.
Is that right?
So recently it's gotten better, but we're now more selective about the opportunities when we play live, just because it's got to be a situation that's conducive to the music, not just some crappy dive bar somewhere, right? And crappy dive bars are great. I'm not discounting that, but
they're awesome.
They're awesome.
You need to get
the right one.
But also you want to go to a place where an audience is going to be. Yes. I think that's the main thing, right? And so for us, it's like there's a lot of venues where there aren't necessarily a built-in audience, so we sort of are a little more selective now. And I kind of, again, liken it to the Beatles of like the studio phase, where they were like, we're going to just make records and we'll do, the odd live thing here and there.
Yeah, am I right? They only toured for like 4 years.
After Revolver, I think they stopped completely.
Yeah.
And they individually, they would each
1972 or something like that?
This was like 60. So by Sgt. Pepper, they were done playing live completely, right? But the individual members would do stuff, and I know John especially said he kind of missed playing live and stuff like that. So that's always going to be a part of what we do. Our bass player just had a baby not too long ago, so there's some life stuff that's kind of slowing us down a little bit. But those guys, I mean, Nick and Matt, the two guys in the Stormalongs, they're my best friends. We're always gonna keep playing, regardless of all the other random stuff that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Where
are you guys playing? You playing next month?
Yeah. I can't announce it yet because it's not confirmed.
Oh, okay.
But if people follow us on Facebook, they'll get it. It's just facebook.com/thestormalongs. And I'm on Facebook as well, solo, Colin James Gibson Music. So if people want to learn about all the other projects that I'm doing, and there are a lot of them these days, that would be great too. In terms of upcoming stuff, honestly, my next big thing is I'm doing an acoustic show at the Mad Bean, which is a really cool coffee shop near my house in Toronto, on Saturday at 1:30. I do that every month. I play for 2 hours solo.
Nice.
It's a great local coffee shop. If I can give them a plug, they do local artists, and they roast their own beans, and it's the classic indie coffee shop.
Nice.
And there aren't any in their neighborhood, so it's important for people to support them.
And you're mixing covers and originals in that set?
Yeah, it's about half and half usually. Sometimes, depending, again, I read the room a little bit. If there's people in the room that are responding more to the covers, then I might lean a little bit more that way. And even within the covers, if I see people responding more to the jazz stuff, then I'll do that. Or if I see them responding more to the Beatles songs or whatever, gospel tune every once in a while never hurts. And then after that, I'm actually in an Amy Winehouse cover band called Shrine House.
No kidding.
Yeah, I really love soul music and Motown. That's kind of my big love these days. And
did you guys sell out the Dakota Tavern or
we've
something?
sold it out twice.
Yeah, I saw something online and was like, oh my god, good for you guys.
With that act?
Yeah, with that
Shrine
act.
House,
Yeah, with Shrine House.
And that's with one of the bass player that was in the Velvet Underground, and also the Doors. He was in
Kirk. Yeah, Kirk Phillips.
So talented.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy.
I literally always am gigging the same days.
I know.
House,
and every time you're playing, I'm playing with someone else.
Yeah,
so
one day.
We'll figure it out. Yeah. So we're playing the Dakota on the 23rd of March with Shrine House as well. So if people want to check that out, get your tickets because it probably will sell out again. The advantage of doing a tribute for an artist that's no longer around is that you're the only game in town. So if you want to hear Amy Winehouse music live, or like the Jeff Buckley thing we did a couple of weeks ago,
which sounded so great. I watched the video, and you guys did a really good presentation.
It takes a bit of brass for the vocalist to cover Amy Winehouse, though. She must be good.
Yeah, Paige Peters. Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. No, the first time I heard her sing, I was like,
this is gonna work.
She's got it. Yeah,
nice.
yeah, for sure. I felt the same way about Taylor though too, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when you hear a great vocalist, that's the other thing about me, like doing all these different types of music that I've done over the years. It's when you hear a great really great singer, regardless of the genre, you know it right away. You know, I always get like kind of a hair stand on the back of your neck kind of feeling, and I go, this is gonna work.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
This is ArtsTalk on 102.7 Shop FM. I'm Dave Peters.
I'm Taylor Koss.
And we are in conversation with Colin James Gibson. Shall we play another song?
Sure.
And when I say we, I mean you.
Sure. Yeah.
What are we going to hear?
Well, I guess kind of we've been talking about different stuff and older music. I've been going down a rabbit hole. Every 6 months I have a new guitar hero, basically. But I've been really into Les Paul recently, the Les Paul, of course. And this is a song called "The World Is Waiting for the Sunrise" that he recorded with Mary Ford back in the 40s. It's one of those songs that I think it sounds like a really happy love song, but like a lot of songs from that period, I think it's actually about beating Hitler.
Cool.
So,
All right. This is Colin James Gibson on 102.7 Shop FM.
Dear one, the world is waiting for the sunrise. Every rose is covered with dew, and while the world is waiting for the sunrise, and my heart is calling you. Dear one, the world is waiting for the sunrise. Every single rosebud is covered in dew, and my heart is calling for you. The thrush on high, his sleepy mate is calling, and my heart is calling you.
Colin James Gibson on 102.7 Shop FM, covering Les Paul and Mary Ford. This is Arts Talk. I'm Dave Peters.
I'm Taylor Koss.
And we are in conversation with Colin James Gibson. That's reaching back. Of course, Django was similar time frame or even earlier. He was
a little bit earlier, but yeah, he was. There's a whole period where Django went electric and he toured the States with Duke Ellington's band.
Really?
Yeah, there was a point where
I love Duke. I never knew that. I gotta
Yeah,
check my
Ellington brought him
albums.
over for a series of shows. I don't know if he ever played with the full Duke Ellington band. They gave Django kind of a feature spot in the show where he would come out and play with a trio with Duke on piano.
Right.
But yeah, it's just like one of those great like what could have been moments, right? Of like, you know, the greatest jazz guitar player in the world just went electric, just had a couple of years at it. And playing with the greatest, you know, big band leader in history. So yeah, it was
We love recent back. Like you love Ella from the 20s and stuff like that. There's
Yeah.
some, and you talk about
Billie Holiday.
wanting to play some of that style too.
Oh wait, which kind are you
Yeah,
talking
but
about?
vocal style, like
Yeah.
the 1920s vocal style.
I was
Ella
I
Fitzgerald,
got
that
into a
kind of
really
thing.
big Angel Olsen phase. You
Oh,
know
yeah.
Angel Olsen? She
Yeah.
had that old timey country thing. So that's been my latest thing where it's like I'm not gonna do it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's so nice and sweet. But no, yeah, all that old classic stuff is just, yeah, I don't know.
And I remember somebody told me, I don't know if it's true, that Les Paul was talking to Eddie Van Halen, and he said, "There's only been 3 innovators in the guitar: Leo Fender, you, and me."
And me, yeah. That sounds like Les. Yeah, yeah.
Died recently too, did he not?
That was about 10 years, I think now.
was a good
But he lived into his 90s and he played every single week at this club in New York,
Really?
basically until he died. And would do like 2-3 hour shows and.
Did he play a Les Paul?
Yeah, he did. He had his own
he
Les
did.
Paul. He had a very fancy, customized Les Paul that he had tricked out over the years that had all this extra stuff on it that no one ever
Fender
had.
flares.
Yeah, exactly. And like he had this thing called the Les Paulverizer, which he never really told anyone what it was, but it was some kind of tape echo delay thing that he kept under the stage, and then he had controls built onto the guitar so he could mess with it.
Awesome.
And he gave him all these weird, mysterious names so that people wouldn't steal his sound, essentially, right? Like, he was really inspiring to me because he was a guy who was, we were talking about the creative limitations of working with tape and stuff like that. Les Paul was a guy who was really working with the basic tools that were at hand at the time, and he invented multi-tracking. He invented the idea of layering guitar parts in different registers and building a whole recording out of just a tape machine and one instrument and a singer. When you were talking about Billie Holiday, I mean, Billie Holiday is another great example of limitation being an inspiring thing. Billie's range was maybe an octave if you're being generous, right? Her actual vocal range was this little tiny thing, but it's the expression,
Totally.
right? It's what she got out of
Yeah,
it.
it's using the instrument, right?
Exactly. Or the thing jazz people always talk about Miles Davis, the Miles versus Coltrane thing. Coltrane could play really fast and really loud and do a million notes. Miles could not do that, but what Miles could do was pick the right note and just give it just that right vibrato or just the right placement in a song. So that's something I think is really inspiring too, is to think about how limitation can become something that's inspiring as opposed to something that closes doors. And a lot of the artists I like have that in common. Django, again, 2 fingers, no musical background whatsoever. Dude just played a lot, right? So, yeah.
That's a lot of good points. I'm going to listen to this interview and like take notes when I go home. Limitations are not a negative thing sometimes. That's fantastic.
I do go on, so.
Dude, no, we don't have a lot of time left. Did you want to play another before we go?
Sure,
Feel like
yeah.
there's one more in you?
Taylor, do you want to give it a go? Okay.
I'm down, yeah.
Okay.
We haven't done this in a long time. Well,
Yeah.
when did we do the Velvet Underground? It was 6 months ago?
Yeah, that was in June, I guess, right? So, yeah, it might even be longer than that at this point.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I should film this. Do you want me to
Oh, it's
yours?
okay. Well, it's recording, so we're okay. I'm just gonna.
Don't we alive?
You can if you would like to. Sure. Okay.
You set up on your phone.
Oh no, I need my phone.
You need your phone? Oh, for the lyric?
Shh! Don't tell them.
Oh, sorry. That's a trade secret then.
Yeah.
All right, so
The magic of radio. We are using charts right now.
So what do I do? I go to Facebook.
Oh my God, no.
Yeah, I'm doing it,
Dave,
I'm
I'm
doing
not giving you lessons right
it.
now.
Video playing live streaming. No, help me.
We are not doing it. Please.
Doing it.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
You ready?
I think so.
Okay.
I hope so.
We'll do like.
What are we hearing?
So this is These Days by Nico.
Yeah, Nico.
Everyone knows it from Wes Anderson movies.
Yeah.
But Jackson Browne actually wrote this song, of all people. Yeah, when he was 14.
Wow, really?
Same, yeah, so tying it all back, right? Look at that. There's a callback for you. But it's funny because it's a really world-weary song. So when I found out how young he was when I wrote it, I was like, what the hell is he talking about?
Yeah, how does he
Yeah,
know?
why are you so sad, man? And it's maybe because he was, working in a studio with Nico. I don't know. Who knows, right?
Weird, difficult.
Yeah.
I've been out walking. I don't do too much talking these days. These days I seem to think a lot about the things that I forgot to do. And all the times I had a chance to, I stop my rambling. I don't do too much gambling these about my way. And I wonder if I see another highway. I had a lover. I don't think I'll risk another these days. These days. And if I seem to be afraid to live the life that I have made in song, it's just that I've been losing so long. La, I stop my dreaming. I won't do too much scheming these days. These days I sit on cornerstones and count the time the quarter turns to 10. Please don't confront me with my failures. I have not forgotten them.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I love playing that song with you. We
I
can
know.
do it anytime.
Totally.
Yeah.
That was Colin James Gibson and our own Taylor Koss.
Hello. That was fun. That's nice. I was really nervous. Oh my god.
Oh,
I never sang on the shows.
No, that's right. That's a first.
I
Yeah.
told you I'm the Secret Service. I got your back.
You,
Always.
you said many words, but those are the first you've ever sung
Yeah.
on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was nice, guys. That was really good.
Cool.
Thanks for letting me crash your performance.
Thanks for doing it. When she asked me to do it, I was like, one condition: you must sing at least one song.
There you go. That was good on you.
Yeah.
Well done.
Cool.
Guys, that was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you so much
making
for
the trek.
coming. Yeah, we really appreciate coming. It was a great show and very, very interesting to meet you and talk to you.
Cool. Yeah.
I remember when Taylor first hooked up with that collective to do that, she was just so pleased with how nice everybody was and how skilled everybody was.
Yeah, like
you just
what
had a great time.
Oh my god, it was I learned so much and just such a good group of people and really
So it's great. It's great
Yeah.
you can make it up.
So glad.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
That has been Colin James Gibson on ArtsTalk. Next week we have
We have Merloaded.
Merloaded.
Yeah, we had to cancel on them because my apartment was in shambles. So we missed their last one. So we're gonna bring them back, and they're gonna do some crazy acoustic punk rock stuff. I don't know what it's gonna sound like, but I can't wait to hear it.
Should be loud.
Kinda.
Thank you all very much for joining us. This has been ArtsTalk, and we're going to leave
Yeah.
with some Stormalongs.
Yeah, we
Look
got
at
some.
that.
Awesome. Thanks,
Look at
guys.
that.
But this is the unmastered.
Right, so it's going to be a little louder and crunchier once you get
Okay,
the
cool.
real version.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is fantastic, so keep an eye out for that. Our thanks again to Colin for coming up, and this is Pythagoras Blues off of Embrace the Hess by the Stormalongs on 102.7 Chop FM.